Hey everyone, welcome back to our One Idea at a Time writing series, where we focus on developing one core argument per body paragraph. Today we're tackling a Task 2 prompt about aging populations. Let's take a look at the task. In many countries, people are now living longer than ever before. Some people say an aging population creates problems for governments. Other people think there are benefits if society has more elderly people. To what extent do the advantages of having an aging population outweigh the disadvantages? Personally, I find the negative side of this argument much more compelling. So for this essay, I'm taking a clear stance. The disadvantages definitely outweigh the benefits. To make this argument clear, we're going to tackle the side I disagree with first. So body paragraph 1 will focus on the advantages. Then in body paragraph 2, we'll bring in the main argument to show why the disadvantages completely overshadow those benefits. Basically, my core argument comes down to this. While the benefits are real, the long-term negative impact is just too massive to ignore. By putting the advantages first, we can acknowledge them fairly before demonstrating why they are ultimately less significant than the challenges created by an aging population. All right, let's figure out our angle for this first body paragraph, focusing entirely on the positive side. Now, if you're trying to brainstorm, your first instinct might be to go with something generic like, old people are nice and have a lot of free time, but that's too weak. It doesn't give us a strong academic argument to write about. We need to look deeper. What is the actual value an aging population brings to a country? It usually comes down to one massive concept: social capital. Think about the unpaid invisible value seniors give back every single day. We're talking about retired grandparents providing millions of hours of free childcare so younger parents can actually go to work, or retired professionals volunteering to mentor the next generation. Now, these contributions are undoubtedly valuable at the community level, and we should acknowledge them fairly. However, as we'll see later, the question is whether benefits like these are enough to offset the much broader economic pressures created by population aging. Let's put that concept into sentences. Watch how this thought develops on screen. Admittedly, a larger elderly population can provide a community with invaluable social capital. I open with admittedly because it immediately signals to the examiner that I am giving the opposing side a fair hearing before I shut it down later. Notice the word can, too. It subtly hints that while these benefits exist, they aren't guaranteed to win the overall argument. Most importantly, look at how I anchor this topic sentence to the single concept of social capital. By doing that, I've set a strict boundary for the rest of the paragraph. Everything that follows must directly serve that one idea. Okay, so we have our anchor, social capital, but an examiner isn't just going to take your word for it, you have to prove it. So how do we make social capital concrete? We break it down into two real-world examples: childcare and mentoring. Watch how we add these details to back up our point. Many senior citizens provide crucial support to their families by offering unpaid childcare, allowing younger parents to remain active in the workforce without the burden of high daycare costs. Furthermore, retirees often pass down decades of professional and life experience by serving as community mentors. Here I'm giving concrete examples. I'm not just making a vague claim, I'm explicitly highlighting childcare and mentoring to give the argument real weight. Now we just need to tie these examples neatly back to our central theme to close out the paragraph. Watch this. Therefore, from a wider social perspective, older generations can function as a stabilizing anchor for both families and local communities. Let's step back and look at how that entire thought flows together as a finished piece of writing. Admittedly, a larger elderly population can provide a community with invaluable social capital. Many senior citizens provide crucial support to their families by offering unpaid childcare, allowing younger parents to remain active in the workforce without the burden of high daycare costs. Furthermore, retirees often pass down decades of professional and life experience by serving as community mentors. Therefore, from a wider social perspective, older generations can function as a stabilizing anchor for both families and local communities. It's a solid, cohesive paragraph because every supporting point stays loyal to that core focus of social capital. But it only tells half the story. Now let's pivot to the real crisis. For my dominant argument, the disadvantages. What is the core problem an aging population creates? It all comes down to economic strain. If you sit down to write this, your brain might flood with different issues. Lower tax revenues, pension strains, and skyrocketing healthcare costs. It feels like you have too many ideas, but look closer. They aren't random, they are just different sides of the same economic crisis. A smaller workforce means less tax revenue coming in, right at the exact same moment that pension and healthcare demands are skyrocketing. Let's turn this concept into actual sentences. Watch how this thought develops on screen. However, despite these undeniable elements of social capital, the profound economic strain of a graying population poses structural challenges that far outweigh any social benefits. This topic sentence is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting. Notice how I explicitly echo the exact words social capital from my previous paragraph. By acknowledging it directly, I create a seamless bridge between the two paragraphs while immediately pivoting to my main anchor, economic strain. Now, just like before, I have to prove it. Economic strain is a strong central idea, but on its own, it's still too abstract. To make the argument convincing, I need to show the specific ways that strain affects society. Watch how I develop that idea. As a demographic shifts toward retirement, the active labor force shrinks, drastically reducing income tax revenues while simultaneously placing immense pressure on state pension funds. Concurrently, an older demographic requires extensive and costly health care, which drains public resources and forces governments to divert money away from critical sectors like education. Look at how these problems connect. At the exact same moment the government loses income tax revenue, they are hit with a double whammy: rising pension demands and massive healthcare costs. Showing this direct cause and effect is exactly how you build a tight, persuasive argument. To finish off this paragraph, we need that landing gear again, a final sentence that brings us out of the specific details and locks in our overall argument. Watch how I close this out. Ultimately, the massive financial burden of supporting an aging society creates vulnerabilities that completely eclipse its social advantages. Now that all the pieces are in place, let's take a step back and look at how this entire counter-argument reads from start to finish. However, despite these undeniable elements of social capital, the profound economic strain of a graying population poses structural challenges that far outweigh any social benefits. As a demographic shifts toward retirement, the active labor force shrinks, drastically reducing income tax revenues while simultaneously placing immense pressure on state pension funds. Concurrently, an older demographic requires extensive and costly health care, which drains public resources and forces governments to divert money away from critical sectors like education. Ultimately, the massive financial burden of supporting an aging society creates vulnerabilities that completely eclipse its social advantages. This paragraph hits hard because it doesn't just list isolated facts, it links them together through direct cause and effect to prove our central anchor. The economic reality simply outweighs the social perk, making this an incredibly persuasive, high-scoring paragraph. All right, we've done all the writing. Let's recap exactly what we just did in this lesson. First, we clearly stated our position that the severe economic disadvantages of an aging population far outweigh any of the social benefits. Then, to prove that, I dedicated the very first body paragraph to the advantages, focusing strictly on the single concept of social capital. I showed how seniors provide crucial support through unpaid family childcare and community mentoring. After giving that side a fair hearing, I pivoted to the dominant argument in body paragraph 2, where we tackled economic strain. Instead of just listing random facts, I linked a shrinking tax base, pension pressure, and healthcare costs together through direct cause and effect. By keeping each paragraph anchored to just one core concept, we were able to clearly prove that the economic reality completely eclipses the social perks. That's all for today's lesson. Now, the best way to lock this in is to put it into action. Head over to the IELTStime.com right now to take our practice quiz. It's going to test you on the concepts we just covered, and the very last question will give you a text box to write out this full essay yourself. Go get your practice in, and I'll see you in the next lesson.